When Michael Donovan reluctantly walked into the shelter that rainy November day, he was just following his therapist's advice. He never expected to find a kindred spirit. In the last cage, forgotten by the world, sat a battle-scarred Ragdoll, with one torn ear and a damaged leg, who had been abandoned by his military family. Their eyes met across the room, two wounded warriors who had been left behind, and in that moment of silent recognition, both of their lives changed forever. What happened next, between this broken Navy veteran and the forgotten feline sentinel, would not only save them both, but touch an entire community and prove that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from those who have been broken themselves. The November storm showed no signs of letting up as Michael Donovan hunched his shoulders against the downpour. His weathered Navy peacoat, the only remnant he kept from his service days, was soaked through by the time he reached the shelter's entrance. Water dripped from his salt and pepper beard onto the welcome mat as he hesitated at the door, one hand gripping his cane tighter than necessary. Michael hadn't planned to visit a cat shelter today, or any day. The idea had come from Dr. Winters during their weekly session. Just spend some time there, she'd suggested, with that careful optimism therapists perfect over years of practice. Animals don't care about your past, they only care about your presence. He'd nodded without commitment. 3 tours in Afghanistan, a medical discharge, and 2 years of isolation hadn't made him much of a people person, or an animal person, for that matter. But the nightmares had worsened recently, and the silence in his small apartment had grown deafening. Inside, the shelter smelled of cleaning products and cat food. A young woman with bright purple hair looked up from the reception desk, her smile genuine but cautious when she noticed his rigid posture and distant gaze. "Welcome to Second Chance. Are you looking to adopt today?" Michael shook his head. "Just looking." The words came out rougher than intended. "Take your time," she said, gesturing toward the visitation room. "We have about 20 cats hoping for homes. The profiles on their cages tell you their stories." Michael wandered slowly through the room, his uneven gait from an old shrapnel, injury marking each step. Playful kittens pawed at their enclosures. Middle-aged tabbies meowed for attention. He acknowledged none of them. His blue-gray eyes focused somewhere far beyond the shelter walls until he reached the last cage. Half hidden in shadow lay the largest cat Michael had ever seen. Its long, matted fur was missing in patches. One ear was partially torn, and its amber eyes regarded Michael with neither hope nor fear, just quiet recognition of another soul who understood what it meant to survive. A small placard hung on the cage. "Admiral, male Ragdoll, approximately 11 years old, special needs," and below, in smaller letters, "limited adoption potential due to age, medical history, and adjustment difficulties." Michael found himself moving closer, something tugging at him that he couldn't explain. The massive cat watched him approach, then, with obvious effort, rose to its feet. One front paw dragged slightly as Admiral limped toward the front of the enclosure. He didn't meow or beg for attention like the others. He simply stood there, tall and dignified, despite his injuries, his amber eyes locked with Michael's. The purple-haired receptionist appeared beside him, her voice soft with surprise. "You're interested in Admiral? That's unexpected." "What happened to him?" Michael asked, not breaking eye contact with the cat. "He was found in an abandoned house after a flood. Military family got deployed overseas and left him behind," she explained. "By the time rescue workers found him, he'd been injured trying to escape rising water. Nerve damage in his front leg. He's also got chronic arthritis that needs daily medication." Michael's jaw tightened. "They just abandoned him?" She nodded sadly. "He's been here 8 months. Most people want kittens or younger cats. And his temperament is," she hesitated, "reserved. He doesn't warm up to visitors." Michael studied the Ragdoll's steady gaze. There was something familiar in those eyes, not desperation or fear, but a quiet resilience, a survivor's stare. "Can I—" Michael paused, surprised by his own question. "Can I meet him?" The receptionist, Zoe, according to her name tag, couldn't hide her shock. "Of course, there's a private room where you can spend some time together." Admiral didn't resist when Zoe carefully lifted him from the cage. She carried him to a small side room furnished with a worn sofa, some cat toys, and a window overlooking the rain-soaked parking lot. "Take as long as you need," she said, placing Admiral gently on the floor before leaving and closing the door behind her. Man and cat regarded each other in silence. Michael sat on the sofa, keeping his distance. Admiral remained where Zoe had placed him, watching Michael with unblinking intensity. Neither rushed to close the gap between them. Finally, Michael spoke. "So they left you behind too, huh?" His voice was rough from disuse. Admiral's ear twitched. "At the sound. I know something about that," Michael continued, surprising himself. He rarely spoke about his service, even to Dr. Winters. "My unit. They came home without me. 6 months in a military hospital while they all moved on with their lives." The Ragdoll took a tentative step forward, then another. His movements were stiff but deliberate, like someone navigating through pain with practiced determination. "They tell me I'm supposed to move on too," Michael said, watching the cat's careful approach. "Find a new purpose. But it's not that simple when you've been damaged." Admiral reached the sofa and paused. With visible effort, he jumped up, landing with less grace than a healthy cat, but with unmistakable purpose. He settled a foot away from Michael, respecting the invisible boundary between them. The door opened, and Zoe peeked in. "How's it going?" "Usually he just sits in the corner until people give up." Michael glanced at the Ragdoll, who hadn't taken his eyes off him. "We understand each other." "Would you like to know more about his care requirements?" Zoe asked, a hopeful note in her voice. "Might as well," Michael replied. Trying to sound non-committal, Zoe launched into Admiral's medical history: arthritis that flared in cold weather, nerve damage that would never fully heal, dental issues that required special food. "He's not an easy cat," she concluded. "Most people aren't willing to take on these challenges." Michael's hand unconsciously moved to his own bad leg. "Easy is overrated." He reached slowly toward Admiral, palm up. The Ragdoll studied his hand, then lowered his head, allowing Michael's fingers to brush against his remaining good ear. "I'll take him," Michael said quietly. Zoe blinked. "Are you sure? He needs medication daily and consistent care." "I'm sure," Michael cut her off. "We both know what it's like to be written off." An hour later, after paperwork and instructions, Michael carried Admiral's carrier toward the exit. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Michael's apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom unit in a quiet complex on the outskirts of town. The walls were bare except for his service commendation and a single family photo. The furniture was sparse, a recliner positioned to face the window, a small television rarely turned on, and a bed that knew more sleepless nights than restful ones. He set the carrier down in the living room and opened the door. "Home, sweet home," he muttered. "Not much, but it's quiet." Admiral remained in the carrier, surveying his new territory with cautious attention. Eventually, he emerged with the same deliberate movements Michael had observed at the shelter. The Ragdoll conducted a thorough inspection, limping from room to room, pausing at windows and doorways, mapping escape routes and safe corners, behavior Michael recognized from his own first days in new territory. Michael set up the litter box, food, and water bowls according to Zoe's instructions. He arranged Admiral's medication on the kitchen counter, organizing the pills with the same precision he had learned during his Navy service. That first evening, they existed in parallel. Michael in his recliner with a book he wasn't really reading. Admiral on the windowsill, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a mutual recognition of boundaries. At bedtime, Michael hesitated before closing his bedroom door. After a moment's consideration, he left it cracked open, a small invitation. AM found Michael bolt upright in bed, sweat-soaked and trembling, fragments of explosions and shouting still echoing in his mind. The nightmares were always worse when it rained. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to ground himself in the present. A soft weight landed on the bed. Admiral had navigated through the darkness and jumped up, despite his bad leg. He didn't approach immediately, but settled. At the foot of the bed, his presence an anchor in the stormy sea of Michael's memories. "You too, huh?" Michael whispered hoarsely. Admiral blinked slowly in response, a cat's version of understanding. Days turned into weeks as Michael and Admiral established their routine. Mornings began with medication, Admiral's arthritis pills hidden in soft food, Michael's own pain meds washed down with black coffee. They would sit by the window together, watching the neighborhood come alive while Michael read the news on his tablet. Gradually, Michael found himself talking more. At first, just practical things, dinner's ready, or time for your meds. Then longer thoughts, observations about the weather, comments on the news. Admiral would listen, his amber eyes fixed on Michael, tail twitching occasionally as if to encourage more. Michael began taking shorter walks with his cane, then longer ones. For greater distances, he used an electric scooter he'd acquired through the VA. He found an old wicker basket at a thrift store and modified it to fit on the front of the scooter. Admiral, who seemed to hate being left alone, would ride regally in his basket, surveying the neighborhood like a furry naval commander. Neighbors, who had barely nodded at Michael before stopped to admire the majestic Ragdoll. "What happened to his ear?" they'd ask. "War wound," Michael would reply, half joking, half serious. Somehow it was easier to talk to strangers with Admiral as a buffer. During his next appointment, Dr. Winters noticed the change immediately. "You seem more present today," she observed. Michael shrugged. "Got a roommate now, cat from the shelter. And how's that going?" Michael thought about Admiral waiting at the window for his return, about the deep rumbling purr that now accompanied their evenings, about the way his massive paw would tap Michael's hand whenever he remained silent too long. "He's persistent," Michael admitted. "Doesn't let me disappear into my head." One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Michael found himself telling Admiral about Afghanistan, about the IED that killed 2 of his friends and left him with a leg full of shrapnel, about waking up in Germany, alone and confused, about coming home to a country that had moved on without him. Admiral pressed against Michael's side, the rumble of his purr providing a counterpoint to the storm outside, grounding Michael in the present, even as he spoke of the past. For the first time in years, Michael slept through the night during a rainstorm. 6 months into their life together, Michael received a letter that shattered their carefully constructed peace. The apartment complex had been sold. New management was implementing a strict no-pets policy. Current residents with animals had 60 days to either relocate or make other arrangements. Michael read the notice 3 times, his hand clenching tighter with each reading. Admiral, sensing the tension, jumped onto the counter beside him, nudging Michael's arm with his head. "They can't do this," Michael muttered, scratching behind Admiral's torn ear. But he knew they could. His lease was month to month, and his fixed income made finding a new place difficult. Pet-friendly apartments in his price range were rare, especially ones that would accept a cat with special needs. That night, Michael made calls to every affordable housing option in a 50-mile radius. The answers were all variations of the same: long waiting lists, no pets, or deposits he couldn't afford. As days passed, Michael grew quieter. Admiral stayed closer, rarely leaving Michael's side, as if he understood the precarious nature of their situation. The Ragdoll's medication was running low, and the next refill would be expensive, money Michael now needed for a potential move. 2 weeks before their deadline, Michael caught a nasty flu. His temperature spiked, leaving him bedridden and delirious. Time blurred as he drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of battles past, merging with present fears. During one lucid moment, he realized Admiral's food bowl was empty. He tried to stand, but collapsed back onto the bed, his body betraying him. "Sorry, buddy," he whispered, darkness closing in again. When Michael next opened his eyes, sunlight streamed through the window. His fever had broken, but weakness kept him bound to the bed. A sound from the kitchen caught his attention. Someone was there. "Hello," he called, voice crackling with dehydration. Mrs. Patel, his elderly neighbor, appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with soup and water. "Your cat," she explained, nodding toward Admiral, who sat regally beside her. "He kept coming to my door, meowing. When you didn't answer my knocks, I used the emergency key." Michael looked at Admiral in confusion. The cat had never shown interest in leaving the apartment before. "He's quite extraordinary," Mrs. Patel said, setting the tray down beside Michael's bed. "He kept pawing at my door until I followed him. When I found you burning with fever, I called my son. He's a nurse at County General." Michael sipped the water gratefully. "Thank you," he managed. "I didn't know he could. Animals know more than we give them credit for." Mrs. Patel smiled. "My son left some medication for you. He'll stop by after his shift to check on you." Over the next few days, as Michael recovered, neighbors he barely knew brought food and checked in on him. Mrs. Patel's son Vikram monitored his condition. Admiral remained vigilant, only leaving Michael's side to eat or use the litter box. One evening, as Vikram checked Michael's temperature, he noticed the eviction notice on the counter. "You're being forced out because of Admiral?" Michael nodded, wearily. "I've called everywhere, nothing in my price range that allows pets." Vikram frowned. "That's discrimination, especially for a support animal." "Support animal?" Michael questioned. "Absolutely." Vikram gestured toward Admiral, who sat watching them with attentive eyes. "He alerted for help when you were in distress. That's what service animals do, and given your military service and PTSD, has your doctor discussed an ESA letter?" The next day, Dr. Winters made a house call. Her first in years, she admitted. After observing Michael and Admiral together, she didn't hesitate to write an official letter designating Admiral as Michael's emotional support animal, protected under housing regulations. "I should have suggested this months ago," she said, watching Admiral groom Michael's hand with gentle determination. "I've never seen you this grounded, this present." Armed with the letter and newfound confidence, Michael requested a meeting with the property management company. He arrived with Admiral in his basket, along with Mrs. Patel, Vikram, and 3 other neighbors who insisted on coming as character witnesses. The property manager, faced with legal documentation, medical testimony, and the united front of tenants, reluctantly issued an exemption. That night, Michael sat on his small balcony, Admiral purring in his lap. For the first time in years, he felt part of something, a community. The Ragdoll who had saved his life had also somehow brought him back to the world. As weeks passed, word spread about the Ragdoll who had saved his owner's life. A local reporter called, wanting to feature their story in the community paper. Michael initially refused. Publicity had never been his thing. But Dr. Winters suggested it might help other veterans see the value of animal companionship. The article, titled "The Admiral's Watch: How a Rescue Cat Rescued His Veteran," ran with a photo of Admiral perched regally in his basket. The day it was published, the shelter where Michael had found Admiral received 5 inquiries about adopting older cats with special needs. "You're a celebrity now," Michael told Admiral, who responded by knocking Michael's coffee mug dangerously close to the edge of the table. A reminder, that fame hadn't changed him. One night in early autumn, Michael woke to Admiral standing on his chest, paws kneading urgently, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Michael's first instinct was to check for signs of his own distress. Was he having a nightmare? But he felt fine. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered. Admiral jumped off the bed and paced toward the door, looking back expectantly. Michael followed, grabbing his cane. The Ragdoll led him to the living room window overlooking the parking lot, where a shadowy figure was moving between cars. Michael recognized the behavior, someone testing door handles. He reached for his phone and called the police. Then Mrs. Patel, whose car was parked in the would-be thief's path. When police arrived minutes later, they caught the man attempting to break into Mrs. Patel's car. He had a history of vehicle theft and had been targeting apartment complexes throughout the area. "How did you know to call?" the officer asked, filling out his report. Michael nodded toward Admiral, who sat in the window, still vigilant. "Military? Intelligence," he said with a hint of a smile. The Admiral spotted him. The officer looked skeptical until Mrs. Patel, who had joined them, nodded vigorously. "That cat has saved this building twice now," she declared. "First his owner, now my car." By morning, everyone in the complex knew about Admiral's latest heroics. Admiral's reputation as the guardian cat led to an unexpected opportunity. The director of the local VA hospital called Michael after reading the newspaper article. "We're expanding our animal therapy program," she explained. "Would you and Admiral consider visiting veterans in our PTSD unit?" The old Michael would have declined immediately. Public spaces, strangers, questions about his service, these were things he'd spent years avoiding. But he wasn't the same man who had walked into the shelter a year ago. After consulting with Dr. Winters, an Admiral's veterinarian, Michael agreed to a trial visit. Admiral received a custom-made vest with "Therapy Cat" embroidered on both sides, which he wore with the same dignity he brought to everything. Their first day at the hospital was challenging. Admiral, sensitive to the sterile smells and fluorescent lighting, stayed close to Michael. But when they entered the recreation room, where 5 veterans waited, something changed. The Ragdoll assessed the room with military precision, then approached. A young woman sitting alone in the corner. She had burns on one side of her face and kept her gaze fixed on the floor, until Admiral gently bumped his head against her hand. Her fingers automatically rose to stroke his fur, and when she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "He knows," she whispered to Michael. "Somehow he knows." What began as a one-time visit became a weekly commitment. Admiral seemed to instinctively identify which patients needed him most, often the most withdrawn or reluctant participants. Michael found himself sharing parts of his own journey, sometimes answering questions about how Admiral had changed his life. "He didn't just save me physically," Michael told a group during one session. "He saved me from disappearing altogether." The veterans coordinator pulled Michael aside one afternoon. "Your cat does more in an hour than some therapists accomplish. In months," she said. "It's like he speaks their language." Michael watched Admiral sitting beside a veteran who'd lost both legs. The man's hand buried in the Ragdoll's thick fur, his breathing gradually slowing to match Admiral's steady purr. "That's because he's been where they are," Michael replied, softly. "Lost, in pain, forgotten. He remembers what it's like." 2 years passed, marking seasons of growth and healing. Michael and Admiral had established a rich life together. Therapy sessions at the VA, quiet evenings at home, weekend visits from Mrs. Patel's grandchildren who adored the majestic Ragdoll. But as their second winter together approached, Michael noticed changes in Admiral. His limping became more pronounced, he slept longer, and stairs became difficult. The vet prescribed stronger medication for his arthritis, but the improvement was minimal. "He's almost 13 now," Dr. Reyes explained, gently, "and his previous injuries are catching up with him. The cold weather will be hard on his joints." Michael installed ramps throughout the apartment. He heated Admiral's bed and carried him whenever possible. During therapy sessions at the VA, Michael would place Admiral directly next to patients so the cat wouldn't have to walk back and forth. The veterans never minded. They'd grown to love Admiral as much as Michael did, looking forward to his visits, bringing him special treats, and even knitting him a soft wool sweater for the winter months. One evening, as the first snow of the season fell outside their window, Michael sat on the couch with Admiral curled in his lap. The Ragdoll's once vibrant fur had dulled, now mostly grey around his muzzle. His eyes, though, remained as bright and attentive as the day they'd first met. "Remember that day at the shelter?" Michael whispered, stroking behind Admiral's torn ear. "I wasn't looking for you, wasn't looking for anyone." Admiral rumbled a deep purr in response. "The counselor said a connection might help," Michael continued. "But she had no idea what you'd become. My friend, my family, my reason to keep going." Admiral lifted his head with effort, meeting Michael's gaze. In those amber eyes, Michael saw the same quiet dignity and understanding that had drawn him in from the start. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "You were the mission I didn't know I needed." Admiral pressed his head against Michael's chest, his purr growing louder despite his weaker body, a soldier acknowledging a truth they both understood. For his arthritis, but the improvement was minimal. "He's almost 13 now," Dr. Reyes explained gently, "and his previous injuries are catching up with him. The cold weather will be hard on his joints." Michael installed ramps throughout the apartment. He heated Admiral's bed and carried him whenever possible. During therapy sessions at the VA, Michael would place Admiral directly next to patients so the cat wouldn't have to walk back and forth. The veterans never minded. They'd grown to love Admiral as much as Michael did, looking forward to his visits, bringing him special treats, and even knitting him a soft wool sweater for the winter months. One evening, as the first snow of the season fell outside their window, Michael sat on the couch with Admiral curled in his lap. The Ragdoll's once vibrant fur had dulled, now mostly grey around his muzzle. His eyes, though, remained as bright and attentive as the day they'd first met. "Remember that day at the shelter?" Michael whispered, stroking behind Admiral's torn ear. "I wasn't looking for you, wasn't looking for anyone." Admiral rumbled a deep purr in response. "The counselor said a connection might help," Michael continued. "But she had no idea what you'd become. My friend, my family, my reason to keep going." Admiral lifted his head with effort, meeting Michael's gaze. In those amber eyes, Michael saw the same quiet dignity and understanding that had drawn him in from the start. "We saved each other, didn't we?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "You were the mission I didn't know I needed." Admiral pressed his head against Michael's chest, his purr growing louder despite his weaker body, a soldier acknowledging a truth they both understood. The deep winter brought record-breaking cold to the city. Michael kept the apartment warm, wrapped Admiral in soft blankets, and administered his medications with careful precision. Yet each day, Admiral seemed to fade a little more, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Still, the Ragdoll maintained his routines, sitting at the window in the mornings, greeting Michael at the door when he returned from errands, purring beside him during their evening reading time, just slower now, more deliberate. One peaceful Sunday morning, Michael woke to find Admiral lying beside his pillow rather than at the foot of the bed. The cat's breathing was shallow, his once bright eyes clouded. "Hey there, Admiral," Michael whispered, his throat tightening. "Rough night." Admiral managed a weak purr in response, but made no attempt to rise. Michael called Dr. Reyes, who agreed to make a house call despite the weekend. After examining Admiral, the vet sat beside Michael on the couch. "His heart is failing," she said gently. "He's in pain, though he's trying not to show it." "That's..." Who he is, brave until the end. Michael nodded, unable to speak. I can give him something for comfort, but... She hesitated. It might be time to consider what's kindest for him. The day passed in a blur of grief and memory. Michael carried Admiral to all his favorite spots in the apartment: the sunny windowsill, the soft cushion on the couch, the heated bed near the radiator. He fed Admiral tiny bits of the special treats he saved for special occasions. Mrs. Patel came by, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks as she stroked Admiral's fur one last time. Vikram stopped in, checking Admiral's comfort and quietly preparing the medications that would ease his passage. As evening fell, Michael settled on his bed with Admiral cradled against his chest. The Ragdoll's breathing had grown more labored, but his eyes remained fixed on Michael's face. At ease, soldier, Michael whispered, voice breaking. You've completed your mission. I'll be okay now. Because of you, I'll be okay. Admiral's purr rumbled softly one final time. Dr. Reyes administered the gentle injection, while Vikram stood by to support both patient and owner. The faithful sentinel closed his eyes, his watch finally over. Michael buried Admiral beneath the old oak tree in the apartment complex's small garden. The property manager, the same one who had once tried to evict them, helped dig the grave despite the frozen ground. He placed a small stone marker with simple words: Admiral, hero, healer, friend. The apartment felt hollow without Admiral's presence. No gentle padding of paws across the floor, no rumbling purr from the windowsill, no watchful eyes following Michael's movements. The silence Michael had once sought now felt oppressive. He continued his visits to the VA hospital, though the veterans asked about Admiral constantly. Michael found himself sharing stories of their time together, funny moments, quiet triumphs, small miracles of connection. He changed my life, Michael told them. Before him, I was just existing. He taught me how to live again. 3 months after Admiral's passing, Dr. Winters suggested Michael might consider volunteering at the shelter where he'd found Admiral. I'm not ready for another cat, Michael said firmly. I'm not suggesting that, she replied. But there are animals there who need someone who understands what it means to be overlooked, to be considered too damaged for a second chance. The following Saturday, Michael found himself back at Second Chance Feline Sanctuary. Zoe, her hair now blue instead of purple, greeted him with a warm hug. We've followed your story with Admiral, she said. You gave him exactly what he needed: purpose, dignity, love. Michael volunteered twice weekly, helping with the harder cases. The older cats, the ones with medical issues, the shy ones who hid from visitors. He had a particular gift for gaining their trust, for seeing past their limitations to their unique personalities. One rainy afternoon, as Michael was preparing to leave, Zoe approached him with a carrier. Inside was a tiny kitten, barely 8 weeks old, with 3 legs and mismatched eyes. Construction site accident, Zoe explained. The rest of her litter was adopted, but... Michael peered into the carrier. The kitten looked back without fear. Her single front paw reached toward him. She needs someone who understands that different doesn't mean less, Zoe said softly. Michael thought of Admiral, of missions completed and new ones waiting, of cycles of healing that never truly end. What's her name? He asked, already opening the carrier door.